Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and here is my co-pilot, Jim Mon.
How you doing?
We're going to go ahead and start with our Hail Mary, and then Jim mentioned a second Hail Mary that he would like to request that we pray this evening for somebody, so I'll let him bring that up when we get to the second one. So,
Sure.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostri. Amen.
And what is our second Hail Mary for, Jim?
Second Hail Mary is for a woman in Alabama named Joy, suffering from a back problem that is inoperable. She's in a lot of pain. We got to know her this week because she bought a cross and she was very patient, worked with us. We had a slight problem on our end. And I said, look, we're gonna pray for her. And she's really struggling, and her name's Joyce in Alabama. So
okay. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostri. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Pray for us.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
Amen.
Amen. All right. So before we begin, let me just kind of jump in on a few notes here. First and foremost, I don't know if you guys saw the article and the what do I call it? The action alert that we sent out earlier this week. But we did, as we tend to do, continual research on the Heretical Association of United States Catholic Priests. And as part of the report, one of the things that we discovered is that the Archdiocese of Milwaukee had published a full-page ad for the AUSCP in their diocesan newsletter that goes out to all of their priests. It's called The Cincture. And I reached out to the communications team at the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, and I said, hey, I wanted to kind of check with you on a few things. Were you aware of the AUSCP taking this position, this position, this position? And if you were not aware, then I would like to offer you the opportunity to clarify matters and to, indicate that, hey, actually the Archdiocese is against all that stuff. We're going to back off. And I asked if you do distance yourself, what remedial actions are you going to take with regard to the ad? I mean, if you take out a full page ad or you publish a full page ad for a bunch of heretics and you do it unwittingly, then it stands to reason that you would then issue a retraction and say, we took out this ad. It was not the right thing to do. And we're going to back off. They didn't do that. In fact, the communications team wrote me back and said, well, really all we do is put the newsletter together. We don't really write the articles. So I'm going to pass this on to our vicar of clergy. Okay. So they CC'd the vicar of clergy. And I responded and said, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hearing from the vicar for clergy. I'd like to hear by Sunday because we're on a deadline. Sunday comes and goes and I don't get any response. The vicar for clergy says nothing. So on Monday I called and I extended the deadline by another 24 hours. On Tuesday, I called and I still got no response. I left a lengthy voicemail message and said, I'll give you an extra few hours. We're still working on the article and I'd really like to hear from you. Nothing but crickets. So we published the article, and after I did, I sent out an action alert. I guess that's what I would call it. So all the people on our email list sent it out, and I said, hey, you really need to see this information, share it with your bishop, ask him to condemn the AUSCP, and then contact the Archdiocese of Milwaukee and ask them what's up. Why are they publishing full page ads for this group? And what are they going to do about it? So a lot of people seeing this email did exactly what we asked. They contacted their bishops, and they also contacted the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, sent emails to everybody on the list, And I'm waiting to see if any of them gets any kind of a response. But it's been tremendous on our side so far with the kind of response that we've gotten or elicited based on this report. So I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased. We have additional information on the AUSCP that's going to be coming out over the course of the next few weeks. We found all kinds of crazy things going on with them. We found some very disturbing information about them. It seems that one of their members is a member of a heretical sect. I mean, an actual, like, condemned from the First Vatican Council heretical sect called the Old Catholics. So we'll be exposing that some more as we go along. I'm actually considering taking a trip out to Minneapolis to kind of sit around the lobby of the AUSCP and maybe see what they're up to, and maybe see if they can recognize me with a face mask on, because they're not going to let anybody within 500 yards of them without a face mask. So, if I've got a face mask on, how are they going to recognize me? That'll be an interesting thing to see.
Great point.
Anyway, so that's a little bit of an update there. If you have not seen the newsletter yet, you probably haven't, because it just now went out as we were starting this evening. The newsletter this evening is on the big conference that everybody started to get in an uproar about, taking place in the Vatican. It's going to be taking place this June. And a lot of people were pointing out the fact that Deepak Chopra is part of this thing. They were pointing out that Chelsea Clinton is a part of this thing. And I said, there's a little bit more to it than just the low-hanging fruit. The purpose of the conference is to create collaboration and to cause these individuals and organizations that were participating in it to be a lot more integrated and collaborative in pushing for universal health. That's kind of the direction this is going. And I looked at the organizations that were part of the coordinating groups, and many of them are pushing contraception in a major way, even providing contraception. One of them is a foundation that was founded by a Catholic philanthropist. He was pretty big, I guess, with Mother Teresa. Well, he died back in 2008 at the age of 95, I think. And very recently, I posted this in the newsletter, that foundation is funding the spread of contraception in a couple of African countries. So it's the whole problem all over again. But it's the fact that the Vatican is inviting these jerks to participate in this conference for the purpose of collaborating and working together for universal healthcare access. Even though they don't actually say that phrase, you read into it and it's like, yeah, it's pretty much what they're asking for. But it's awful. It's horrible. These individuals are horrible. The groups are horrible. They've got representatives of Moderna and Pfizer there, so you can imagine what they're going to be representing and talking about. Anyway, so I'm going to be continuing on with my investigation of that group as we move forward as well. So anyway, that's kind of the update on what we're working on here at the Lepanto Institute. Tonight's topic is it's one of my favorites, actually. We're going to be talking about evolution, but not just evolution. We're going to be talking about evolution as the launching platform for the cancel culture. A lot of people hadn't really thought of it this way before, but if you look back, it was evolution that was used first as a canceling mechanism in academia. And now everybody's being canceled, but it started with evolution in academia about almost 100 years ago. So anyway, Jim's going to get us started, and I am going to play the role of editorial commentator.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, man.
Yep.
Just a couple of points though before we get started. I think it's really worth mentioning. It's very important, especially in today's society, to understand how to be a generalist, and especially try to be a good Catholic. So what I mean by that is, I don't have any degrees in microbiology or astronomy or any of that stuff. But I do have the ability to kind of dig down and look into things and get an overview. And I think it's really important because the really smart guys are the ones who are speaking on this. And you have to just do a little work and decipher. And I think it's an important topic, as Hitch pointed out. And the reason being is that this was the first firewall. Is really what it was. And I found this really interesting. So essentially, you start out by this, right? The leftists completely hijacked the narrative and basically de facto anointed Darwinism as science, right?
Yep.
And so, when it really is nothing of the sort, there are tremendous inconsistencies in this theory. And we're going to go through them. And a lot of this information comes by way of a guy who's a leader in sort of the intelligent design movie. He's a evangelical Christian, but very interesting guy. And he approached this thing strictly from a scientific standpoint. His name was Dr. Stephen Meyer. And he got his doctorate from Cambridge, and he's author of two books that are worth mentioning, Darwin's Doubt and Signature in a Cell. Worth noting, he has many lectures on YouTube, and we're going to put some of them in the show notes. In academic circles, it's fair to say it's very highly regarded. But he also represents like a large number of evolutionary biologists, and he really is a guy worth listening. So let's start out by this. What's the difference between the argument of intelligent design, creationism, and we'll call it neo-Darwinism? Because definitions is very important to the context of this discussion. So creationism is taking the Bible as historical record. And for our discussion today, we will not really focus on this too much. We all know it's true. It's just, but in terms of a scientific debate, we're trying to arm you with some facts here to help out. So we're going to focus mostly on intelligent design and neo-Darwinism. So intelligent design is an Earth age neutral theory that attempts to employ scientific principles to discussion of life's origins. Intelligent design makes the claim that based on observation and reasoning, only an intelligent source can make the large genealogical progressions in biological design. So stay with me here, right? And a few other terms, that we just need to sort of understand. In terms of evolution, has a couple of multiple meanings. A couple of multiple meanings. The first one is obviously change over time, but this is too broad of a definition. So, evolution in neo-Darwinism, in terms of evolution, is promoting all forms of life are connected by common ancestry. Ancestry can be traced back to one single cell. And Darwin uses sort of this tree of life analogy whereby everything comes from it, right? So,
interestingly enough,
yes.
The tree of life analogy goes back to ancient Wodenism, which you had the tree of Odin, which was the tree of life, and it had roots that went into the earth, and those roots, the whole time of human history was integrated into this tree. So it's kind of interesting. Darwin kind of took it from paganism.
Right. So I didn't know that. So there is a real consistency with pagan roots in this theory. That's great. So first we're going to go through where neo-Darwinism goes wrong, and Hitch, jump in at any time. Evolution, right, states, or neo-Darwinism, the universe is non-directed. It's an unguided process where life changes and evolves over time. And back to Hitch's tree example, random mutation, so completely random. This theory sees nature as a self-creating entity that can produce think of all the wonders and intricacies of a universal of the planet we live on, with life, plants, etc. There are many examples, however, of discontinuity in the study of genomics, right? But there's much evidence of large classes of genes that show no evidence of being associated with other classes. This is where God comes in, and we're going to go into this a little deeper. The second false claim is natural selection and random mutations are sufficient to produce all forms of life. And Hitch, we're going to drill down on this one a little bit, right? So life is an unguarded, undirected process that produces the appearance of design, but in reality, it's not. That's insane, right? And let's break this down. Where is the discontinuity in science with the establishment of life? So Darwin never addressed the question of the origin of life. He presupposed the existence of the first living cell. He admitted the flaw in his thinking, and more accurately, the inadequacy of his thinking. It was self-effacing. So he assumed 4 billion years of life on Earth. And here's the thing, it's mathematically impossible to have gene mutations to the level of life we have right now even in that huge amount of time. It's mathematically impossible. And as he It's basically an overwhelming no, and let's prove this by it was called the Quantify experiment in Cambridge, University of Cambridge University, England, right? So they did how rare are functional gene combinations to the ones that are non-functional. So they did this with a relatively short protein, right? 150 amino acids, and here's the point. So remember, this is about to give you context. Functional to non-functional, right? So for every random test they did to come out with a functional gene, the number was 1/10 to the 77th power. Now, Hitch, do you know what that is? Now, this. I think this really says it, right? Again, remember, functional gene to non-functional gene. We're talking about mutation,
right? So once again, we're talking about we're talking about a gene. We're talking about a protein, right?
Yes. Well, they used a protein. That's exactly right. These 150 amino acids long. It was a protein, right?
So they're talking about creating a protein. I remember back in the 80s when I was watching, what did we have? We had PBS, and they would have the Smithsonian Institute do a program, and then they'd have National Geographic, and I think there was one called the Blue Marble, which was all about life on planet Earth, and of course you had what's his name
Carl Sagan?
Carl Sagan,
right?
Billions of years ago, and the thing is, so Carl Sagan sitting there with his baritone billions of years ago voice. I distinctly remember him talking about how they created a protein in a lab.
Yes.
And I was going, okay, so you have this completely, and I was, like 10 years old. And I'm going, you have a completely and totally controlled environment where you are directly and deliberately putting all of these components together to create what you called a protein. Did it work?
Nope.
No.
And I think you're referring to, and that's actually kind of cool you brought that up. Let me find that. What they did was, actually I lost the notes. The test you're referring to was slightly different, but the same idea. So they produced this, and there were actually a couple of amino acids formed from that, right? However, there was no codifying DNA. It went nowhere. It was useless. It wasn't life. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. So effectively, these guys are patting themselves on the back at what geniuses they were. And basically, all they made was some protoplasm or some nonsense. Wait, that's wrong. Protoplasm has infinitely more life than this. Right.
Well, here's the other thing, right? Where did they get the components?
From gases, right? That they picked up. That was life. That was other life.
Yes, exactly. So, in other words, in order to create this protein, this amino acid, they had to have organic life that initially produced the basis for the chemicals that they used to put it together in order to make it work. In other words, they created a miniature Frankenstein monster. That's all they did.
That's all they did. Right.
They stitched together a bunch of dead parts and then they put it under a microscope where they zapped it with electricity. And they were waiting for that aha moment where they were going, it's alive!
That's a perfect, actually, critique of that. That's exactly what they did. Let me get to this last point, Hitchby, and I want your opinion on this. Because this is the point. When they took this and they were trying to find out functional to non-functional genes. So real quick, a functional gene would be, okay, one gene goes to my nose, helps me breathe. That's functional. Another gene goes absolutely nowhere, and it just kind of, that's non-functional. 1/10 to the 77th power. You know what that is in context? That is one marked atom in 10 trillion galaxies of a Milky Way. That's why in 4 billion years, random mutation does not work. It's a glaring hole in Darwin's theory. Anybody, I'm not particularly scientifically inclined, however, I know how to read. That's it. That's just the first one.
And when you put it down to that kind of probability, somebody else put it to me this way. They said it would be like taking a junkyard and shaking it up for 1,000 years and expecting a Boeing 747 to be randomly assembled by shaking that junkyard.
Yes.
So, it's not going to happen because the law of entropy alone is stacked against evolution, because evolution is progressive. It says that everything builds on itself and everything is always progressing to the next step. But the problem is that the law of entropy says that everything is breaking down to its most basic components. And that's true of everything. It's true of geology. It's true of light. It's true of astronomy. You see the motions of the planets, orbits decay.
Yes.
Planets and dust, they disperse. Everything breaks down to its most basic components. It is a law. It is a universal law. There is no part of the universe where entropy does not play a part.
Wow. Right.
And biology is one of the most obvious forms of entropy. We all age.
Yes.
We get old. That's entropy. That's entropy in action. And you can watch it from generation to generation to generation.
True. Exactly. Can I go to the second point? I just say this real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So Hitch, this is cool. So the second one, okay, now remember, just to review, the first one, genetic mutation, mathematically impossible to get the world where we are, just random mutation. Go ahead.
One thing I just want to toss in there is just to reiterate the fact that what you're pointing out are arguments that were posed by somebody who is not a Christian, based on the science of evolution. He took their science. He took their application of science. And they said, okay, let's take it to its logical step. Let's follow it through and see if it works.
Yes, using their criteria.
Yes.
That's exactly right. And that's a key point. That really is a key point. And so the second one was really so interesting. So mathematically impossible. That's the first thing you got to take away. The second one, this is cool. It's called the Cambrian explosion. Cambrian is a place in Wales, right? This issue bothered Darwin a great deal, but again, he did not address it, right? Many groups of animals have exhibited completely new body plans in a very narrow window of geological time, with no discernible connection to ancestral precursors. I read that, but think about that for a second. So I'll say it again. Many groups of animals have exhibited completely new body plans in a very narrow window of geologic time with no discernible connection to an ancestral precursor. It was created.
Let me break that down.
Yeah.
What they're trying to say is that at the most basic layer of the geological or the fossil record, which is what they call the Cambrian explosion. Right. You have suddenly the eruption or the appearance
right.
of a whole slew of different animals that have characteristics that did not themselves evolve. You have animals that have gills. You have animals that have eyes, functional eyes. There's no intermediary step leading up to a functional eye. It's just all of a sudden you've got life and they have these functions: sight, appetite, the ability to eat, the ability to reproduce. There are no intermediary steps. It's just boom, they're all there. That's what the Cambrian.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it was interesting too, particularly you had mentioned sight. Incredibly involved, complicated. All of a sudden, it just appeared, right? So it goes. And this theory, by the way, supposedly goes back 520 million years is where they got this. And by examining the fossils and rock formation of the Earth, there was like this abrupt, sudden emergence of new life form, right? And there was no discernible connection to anything else previous. And remember Darwin's tree of life theory: we emerged from one cell. So it was completely falsified, and the fossil records did a pretty good job. Now, what did Darwin say about this? His answer, he didn't really have a satisfactory answer, and he kind of opined or engaged in conjecture that the mystery of missing fossils would somehow show up later on, and they did not.
That perpetual search for the missing link.
Yes, that exactly right, and not only did they not show up
in literary circles, this is called a MacGuffin.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
There you go.
If you ever watch a story where they've got this thing they're looking for, they don't ever really find it. It's not really essential to the plot because the plot is character driven. The plot goes, it's all about their adventures, but they're always looking for this thing. That's called a MacGuffin.
Oh, okay.
And so the missing link, that's a MacGuffin.
Oh, cool. Oh, so he documented that, and so like actually, many of these scientists documented that there were many mutations that was not random at all. They were expressions of pre-programmed capacity. That's where God comes in. An external trigger, and they did this in experiments, and they replicated it by putting an external pressure on an organism and seeing how they mutated. And it just didn't add up. There was absolutely no way. So, and what they found out was that there was pre-programming, the great coder, as it were. So this is, again, it was pointing to intelligent design. But the interesting part about all this, again, remember, is these guys have really sort of tried to present this evidence, and they've been shut down. Yep. Because you cannot have any indication whatsoever that there may be intelligent design, that we may, because that opens the door to God, and it's awful. So there were other things too, like the Miller-Urey experiment, and this is what you were referring to earlier. And it's still in some textbooks. And we talked about it. That was the name of it, Hitch. That was the Miller-Urey experiment. And the fact that they only produced a few amino acids, and what it did produce was lacking the programming-rich information that's required to sustain life. And that's that was the name of it. And that's what they really got hammered on. So I
remember hearing about that experiment, and so I was talking to a scientist, and he told me a story about how a group of scientists had gotten together, and they actually approached God, and they said, God, we don't need you to create life. We can actually create life like you did, straight from dirt. We can take dirt and we can make new life out of that dirt. And God said, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
And so they went out into the yard with all their instruments and their shovels and everything, and they started digging, and they were putting it into a box, and God walks over and says, what are you doing? They said, oh, we're gathering dirt so that we can make life. And God said, get your own dirt.
Nope. So this is cool. This is where we fast forward to the woke culture, the cancel culture, the left. And we're going to go back and forth a little bit, but check this out. So Stephen Meyer, right? He has this extremely interesting experience because he does all this research, got an army of people behind him. He's like, well, clearly Darwin's just full of all holes. So he goes down to Texas, and he's invited to speak at the Texas State Board of Education. He brings with him and collects a mountain of peer-reviewed paper, right? And the standard in Texas before was always encourage teachers to teach the strength and weaknesses of all scientific theories in an open forum. Not Darwin, no. Yeah. You cannot apply that scientific method to Darwin's theory of evolution. And what happened? The Darwin people in the education came out of the woodwork. They just did a mass blitz. They silenced him. They went on the news. Eugenie Scott from the Educational Lobby makes this quote in the Dallas Morning News. There are no weaknesses in the theory of evolution, period. Right? And it was just like this guy's, and I remember he's this guy, at the time he wasn't particularly Christian. Right? He's go, well, what do you mean? It's like, I have a mountain of peer-reviewed papers. This is factual. I'm backing it up with data. Why wouldn't you want to talk to me? Right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's your first, and again, remember, this is like in the early 90s, and there's a great quote from Richard Dawkins. We love him. In the New York Times, I love this quote. It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that last one wicked. I mean, the arrogance of these people. So why the intense opposition and vitriol towards Meyer? Again, he shows up there because with challenges to neo-Darwinism, Meyer was there to testify. He was shut down, but he just represented such a threat. And look at how they're digging in now. Think about it yourself. Like who's that idiot? That guy. Oh God, what's his name? Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
I sent you. What an idiot, right? So here's this guy. It was hilarious. It was actually very funny. He's standing up and he says, "I'm going to address not intelligent design, but stupid design." It's a 4-minute video. I'll put it in the show notes. It's worth your time. And he stands up there, and in a like-minded room of bomb-throwing commies, he's up there. That's what I call my liberal friends. It's just a little thing I have. And he's up there, and they're all yucking it up. And his reasons for shooting down intelligent design were pathetic from an intellectual standpoint. Get this one. Our mouths can eat and breathe. How ridiculous would it tell? No one would have done that. That was his premise. Anyway, he just goes on this ridiculous tirade. Everyone's laughing, yucking up. This guy's fantastic. He's great. And frankly, if you ask me, you look like a moron. But that's other. So the major explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism, it does not explain the origins of what we call. Was that Hitch?
I'm just
yeah. I think I kind of rolled over that a little too fast. Let's make fun
I'm just
of
sitting here thinking about what he said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well. Why would we have an organ that serves two functions, breathing and eating?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't that sort of a dual function and utilitarianism kind of elegant?
Well, not only that, but there are all sorts of parts of our bodies that serve dual functions, multiple functions. Our skin, for instance. We sense things with the skin. Our skin keeps our organs inside our body.
Great point. It's a way to regulate temperature.
Yes.
There's all sorts of reasons.
Our skin also exudes oil. It helps regulate hormonal balances.
Yep.
I mean, it houses hair so that the hair can act as a wick away from the body. I mean, there are all sorts of functions about just the skin alone. And if you look at the skin on a cellular level, and the fact that each of our fingerprints is completely unique, that our skin in certain points exudes oils that protect not just the skin, but also fight against infection. You look at the many multifaceted layers. Now, here's the problem with evolution. So evolutionary thinking has gotten so embedded in the way we approach everything in this country. Not just in this country, but everything. Okay, it's evolutionary thinking is now a political thing, right? And I don't mean like biological evolution. I mean it's now a political idea that everything is progressing. Even in politics, there's no entropy. There's no breakdown. There's no societal breakdown. Everything is just progressing in a different way, in a more aggressive way towards something greater. You have theological evolution with this idea that somehow our theological understanding of Christ is going to help to elevate us to the cosmic Christ, where we all become Christ. So there's theological evolution. You've got technological evolution, where we're always coming up with better, more innovative ideas that are going to be so great for humanity, and we're going to progress and go out and reach the stars, right? To what end?
That's a great point. That's exactly the point.
But I want to take it one step further.
Sure.
Because evolution has so ingrained itself into medicine that we have to use evolutionary ideologies in order to create vaccines, in order to actually suppress certain parts of the body's real functions, like reproduction. So now progress means going backwards. It means breaking something that's supposed to function in a right and proper way. Evolution is also a part of the whole transgender movement. Oh, well, we're moving towards an androgynous being. We can all be androgynous. We don't have male and female. We'll be whatever the in-between is. And it's all this progression. They want to use certain ideas with vaccines. And the reason they vaccinate, one of the primary reasons that they vaccinate, is because they start with the premise that your immune system is not good enough in order to fight the diseases that are out there. God didn't know what he was doing. Evolution is going to fix the problem.
Great point. You nailed it. Can I take it a step further? Because think about this, right? So if we have, there's design in life is an illusion, intelligence is an illusion, and we're subject to complete randomness. We're just sort of floating balls of protoplasm in the sky, right? First point, number one, it's complete existential detachment. That's what they're going for, right? No matter whether it's Sam Harris debating Ben Shapiro and talking about the fact that Sam Harris, although subscribes to that sort of notion that we're just randomly here and there's no greater, there's no higher power, there's no higher authority, God. Right. So that since that's not there, well, how do you answer the question? I think Ben Shapiro does this very well. Well, what's from stopping you then from going over to your neighbor's house, clubbing over the head and taking all this stuff, whatever you want? Because if if there's no sort of authority in the universe or no order, that we are responsible, that there's no personal agency and no mind behind this universe, what's the ultimate meaning? And, a lot of these guys in the course of my research for this brought up this great point. Given the breakdown of families, look at the amount of the opiate crisis, particularly with young people, as well as other people, particularly young people, and teen suicide.
Yeah.
There's a complete detachment going on. There's a breakdown of families. That real love is gone. Yeah, I mean, what were you saying? Going to say something?
So it starts. This is kind of the logical progression of evolution, the logical outcome of it. If you start with an evolutionary idea that leads to the conclusion that there really isn't a God, or if there is a God, he's not
Yes.
a personal one. Because what does it do? It does two things. Okay. On the one hand, you have atheistic evolution, which says there is no God, everything came together by chance. Okay.
Yes.
So then evolution becomes a vehicle for propping up the atheist position.
Right.
But then you've got theistic evolution, which props up the idea that, oh, there's a God. He's just very distant. Because necessarily the theistic evolutionists who buy into the billions of years paradigm are saying God has so distanced himself from humanity that he started the ball rolling billions of years ago, and he's just been kind of out to lunch ever since.
Is that like a deist theory?
Well, it is deism.
The clock, right? The sort of
Right.
the clockmaker.
Yeah, the clockmaker.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay.
So but I mean, they say, oh, we believe in God. I believe in God. I believe God created the universe. Sure. But it was billions of years ago, and that science has just kind of moved its way ever since. And that, for billions of years, there was basically nothing. The universe was a giant echo chamber, and God just kind of sat there and twiddled his thumbs because he had nothing to do. But,
Right.
it's absurd to put forward this idea that there can be a theistic understanding of evolution without necessarily inscribing into the minds of the people that he's not readily present. There's no intimate relationship because he's way back there. He's way back there. Now, you break that down and you have this lack of integral relationship with God. Evolution seems to undermine a lot of our understanding of miracles, because what happens with a miracle, and this is something that you and I talked about earlier. Science continues to try to answer the question, when was the universe created and how was it done?
Yeah.
Well, you can't apply
right.
science to
No.
a miracle. You
Nope.
can't. If we were to go out with a compass on the day of the miracle of the sun to try and track the sun's movements in the sky and postulate how it actually was able to move around in the sky, while at the same time somebody in the United States was looking at the sun going, I don't see anything happening. And then trying to determine, well, scientifically, how did this happen? Oh, and then, by the way, to also say how the ground became perfectly dry without anybody being harmed.
Great example.
The level of energy that would have been required to dry the ground that quickly at Fatima would have been more than the hydrogen bomb.
It was a mud bath.
Yes, it was a mud bath. The ground was saturated.
I looked at the original secular media reports.
So this idea that evolution, billions of years and this long time, how do we find out how it happened? And we look at the way the cosmos works and, on down the line. And as I pointed out to you, when Jesus went to Cana, he looked at at 6 urns of water. Now it's interesting, the number 6. 6 days of creation. 6 earthen urns filled with water. What did he do on the first day? He separated the waters. He divided the waters.
Right.
So you have the waters with the earth separated into 6 urns, and Jesus goes over and instantly it becomes wine. Not just wine, but fine wine. And it takes about 30 years to produce a fine wine. And we know that it was a fine wine because we have an expert witness who was on the scene, who tasted it and said, you've saved the good wine for last.
Right.
Which is unusual. It happened in an instant. You have a scientist, the wine taster, who tasted the wine, who tested the wine and said, this is an old wine. It's a 30-year wine. And Jesus had just created it. If you try to apply science to creation in the same way that the scientist, the head waiter, the wine taster, the expert witness tested that wine, he would have recognized it as old, but it wasn't. And he could not point to a process by which it was created except by the witnesses who were there. Now, what witnesses do we have to the creation of the universe? We have Moses, who wrote Genesis as a prophet, speaking for God. He spoke directly to God. He sat with him on Mount Sinai, right? God actually wrote into tablets with his finger and handed them to Moses, said, here, take these. Okay. Moses had a direct line with God. He had direct personal communication with God. And God told him, write these things out. He wrote out Genesis. Did Moses get it wrong? Did Moses just make it up on the spot? Was he trying to explain a complex problem to a bunch of desert, nomads? What's interesting about this is that in the book of Job, you have, so in Genesis, you don't get the creation of the sun and the stars until the third day. Did you know that?
No.
In the first day, you've got light, but the sun and the stars and the moon don't come until the third day. Where was the light coming from? So if light's in the beginning, but the sun, the moon, and the stars don't come until the third day, in the book of Job, God is castigating Job. I mean, he's really laying into him. He says, gird up your loins like a man. I'll ask the question, Did you answer me? Because you're so wise, so arrogant. And then, so he turns to Job and he says, Job, answer me these questions. One of the questions he asks is, what is the source of light? Where does it come and where does it go? Why would he ask that question? He asked that question in conjunction with, were you there at the foundation of the universe? Did you measure its foundings? Did you measure the pillars? Did you set them in the ground? Did you help to establish where the stars would go and how they would move? So as he's asking these questions, he asks the source of light. Where does light come from? Well, it's a direct reference back to Genesis. So all of these things, you cannot apply science to a miracle. You just can't.
No.
And it's absolutely patently absurd for these scientists to sit there and say, well, we can look at our processes and we can see the motion of the stars and then work our way back. Guys, you can walk back to a certain point, but you can't walk back indefinitely and say that you found the center of creation. It doesn't work.
Nope. Fair enough. You were bringing up that point earlier, Hitch. Like I love the example you gave, because if you were, quote, a scientist and you were going to examine that wine at the wedding at Cana, probably be 30 years old, right? And so their science has spoken. Well, science is wrong, and I think you're right when you ascribe, because the nature of salvation, all of it's all a miracle,
Right.
But what I find compelling is this guy is debating these people on their own soil. And,
Right.
And I think, because I guess from a human standpoint, you've got to do that. And no one's listening. They
don't want to listen.
Right. They're not only not listening, they're dug in. I mean, he's done a pretty good job of pointing out that the origins of, what was that word? Phenotypic complexity that refers to the visible attributes of an organism's body doesn't show that. In other words, from the standpoint of anatomical novelty, it's just impossible. It's mathematically impossible, number one. And number two is that there are monstrous gaps, right? And again, what is science? They claim to, the other side claims to want to embrace science. It's just like abortion. It's just like climate change. Want to get on the list? It's just like transgenderism. Right? No, we're going to wrap ourselves in science, which is actually one big monstrous lie, and then we're going to proceed and then, in a true diabolical fashion, invert it and attack you.
Right. So, like you said, with abortion, what do? They say, well, you have to scientifically, this is just a clump of cells. No, it's not.
No, it's not. 99%
Absolutely not.
of biologists, or I think it's 95. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact number. It's either, but I'm positive it's a minimum of 95. I think it's even higher. Of biologists are saying that's ridiculous. This is when life begins. I mean, these guys have no skin in the game.
Right.
They're speaking from science.
Right. So the science is actually against the abortionists.
Yes.
Because every human being has a biological beginning. And that biological beginning, it's like a thread. You can sit there and snip that thread any level, but you're still cutting thread. Even if you're cutting it right at the source, you're still cutting a thread. And if every human being is a thread, or every human life is a thread, then if you're cutting anything of it from the very end or all the way at the very beginning of life, when it all starts, and we know when it starts because we know how the process works. I mean, it's not rocket science, and anybody who's seen chickens in a barnyard knows when those chickens start, you know. But the science is against them, so they have to come up with propagandistic attempts or rhetoric in order to fight against it.
That's exactly right. And if you notice too, have you noticed it's all about mocking?
Oh yeah,
you Rube. I'm watching this idiot. Neil deGrasse Tyson, whatever. I always get it wrong, so I never really want to. I really don't care to memorize it. But I'm just like, oh, this guy is so arrogant. And so again, I keep banging these points home. Intelligent design would point to a world where there is proof of God. At least open that door, and that we're not just animals. We have this obligation to engage in morality and have personal agency. We can't have that. We can't have people start thinking. And you look at those two facts again: mathematically impossible, big chasm on genetically in terms of upper functions in animals. Not there.
Right.
This was created, And again, but again, Hitch, to your point, add this to anything that is of newsworthy value today. I'm thinking COVID, climate change. That's another one. I forgot about COVID. Obviously gender difference. All of these things.
Mm-hmm.
We don't. It's become a.
Well, the entire eugenics movement is predicated on evolution.
Yeah. Speak to that, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Right?
In the eugenics movement got its start in the late 1800s. It was this idea that, well, we can breed the better human, right? So you want to breed out the undesirables. So you look for ways to not have them procreate. And in fact, in Nazi Germany, one of the things that Adolf Hitler proposed or put forward was actual cards that would allow you to start a family, and everybody else that didn't get a card or a license would be sterilized. Hitler ran propaganda for a very long time against what he called der Untermensch, which means the subhuman. And the subhuman looked like a person, talked like a person, but they had certain dysgenic characteristics that were less than human. Margaret Sanger, who was a huge eugenicist, her whole idea of Planned Parenthood was predicated around this idea of eugenics. And eugenics, of course, once again, is based on evolution. You want to weed out certain dysgenic populations like the blacks and the Jews and the Italians and the Irish. So even though she was Irish, which is ironic.
Really?
But, oh, yeah. But you have all of these people that they want to get rid of in order to create the master race. Margaret Sanger in one of the population or the birth control review, which was Margaret Sanger's publication. In the birth control review, she had an article by Ernst Mayr, who was part of Adolf Hitler's eugenics stuff in Germany before World War II started. But Ernst Mayr said that Superman was the goal of eugenics. So the idea was to create Superman. Right. We want to come to Superman.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say there were a couple of comments here. It was a Colin McManaman. A massive insult to God, crimes against heaven. It's true. The entire thing is a diabolical inversion. And Hitch, correct me if I'm wrong, just popped into my head. I'm reminded of, like, everyone brings this up, but you have 1984 Orwell's and Huxley's Brave New World. I kind of put this on Huxley's book. It's the idea that you don't go after people to get them dumb and stupid and compliant by penalizing them or chastising them. You actually load them up with stuff that makes them comfortable and stupid. Mm-hmm. So keep the pot booze stores open. We're going to lock you down. We'll throw you a check just so you can have a minimum. We'll keep the entertainment on TV. But no one, but I go through all of these examples that we're just talking about, and no one, it's really down the road, and no one seems to be fighting it, and if you do, you're automatically cancered, and the left has enormous energy. It's amazing.
Yep. Well, it's demonic energy.
Yes, yes.
It really is. Now, it's fascinating because evolution led to eugenics necessarily leads to socialism.
Right.
And it's interesting that socialism, every time communists took over a particular territory throughout the 20th century, the number one thing that they did is they rounded people up into education camps to preach the message of Darwinism. They were always taught about evolution. Why? Because they needed the people to understand that they themselves and everyone around them were just higher functioning animals, and that's it.
Wow.
Because you can't, if you break everybody down to just being a higher functioning animal, well, then altruism goes out the window.
Sure.
And there's no need to help your fellow man.
Why would you? It's not in your best interest.
Right. It's not in your best interest. It's
No.
actually in the best interest of humanity. If you've got somebody who's sick, lame, suffering, handicapped in any way, shape, or form, well, obviously their genetic makeup isn't good for the rest of us, and we would just be better off if they were gone.
Lisa Evers has a 9mm that says hell no.
Yeah, yes.
All right, Lisa. Big fan.
Yep.
You just reminded, Hitch, we talked about this, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, but Protestantism leads to atheism, right? Sure. So, work with me here. So here we have, because effectively with Protestantism, since there's no authority, we'll chip away, and we'll make our decisions based on utility and convenience ultimately, right?
Right.
And so, since it does lead to atheism, this is precisely what's happening with this, right? So if you can't defend the truth because your religious principles are malleable, let's call it that, then little by little you're like, okay, just give them some and they'll go away. And then you wake up one day and now COVID's the law of the land, the Great Reset's taken over. Darwinism, even though it's a ridiculous theory, is now being taught, and little by little they win. And that's how it goes.
Well, and this is why we need a savior, right?
Yes.
Because at some point, and St. Paul made it clear, we fight the world, the flesh, and the devil. These are the three things that are always against us. We're always against the world, the flesh, and the devil. And what is the world? Darwinism is probably the biggest representation of the world. It wants to consume us. It wants to, and it's kind of funny in a way, because at the end of our lives, the world does consume us in a very literal sense. Yeah. We get buried, so we go into the earth, we get planted. But because we have a savior who draws us back out of the earth with a general resurrection, he defeats the world in that sense with the resurrection. But evolution says that there's no resurrection. There can't be.
No.
Because there is life and then there is not life. Except in so far as we have spontaneous generation, which we said didn't happen, but we do think it happened with evolution, because we need it to happen in order for evolution to work. So
they're ignoring that.
Yeah, they conveniently ignore that stuff,
Right.
And they predicate everything on circular reasoning.
Yes, that's right. And this is an interesting topic because I think, remember I made the statement, you have to be a generalist. You have to have an understanding, again, of these basic points and just go, because they roll over you. if you don't
Yep.
think about this, Hitch, right? If you're not willing to say, well, wait a minute, I have to give this some thought, and you go, the standard monolithic chorus, if you don't follow evolution, you're an idiot.
Right.
You are clearly you're from you're a hillbilly, or you're one of those Fox News, whatever, whatever, throw a label on there, whatever.
Right.
You instantly just
Well, and it's the beginning of cancel culture. So
yes.
first they call you an idiot because you don't believe the science, right?
Yes.
You don't believe the science of evolution, and then what happens as time goes on? You don't adhere to whatever the next social meme that they create, and they either ridicule you as being an idiot for not believing it, or they call you a hater.
Yeah.
So you don't accept homosexuality and transgenderism. You're a hater. Well,
That's right.
wait a minute. Wait just a second. Let's
that's
look at the
exactly right.
science here. You with evolution, you were telling me to believe science. You were telling me that I'm an idiot for not believing science. And here we are talking about a man dressed as a woman, claiming to be a woman, wanting to go into a woman's bathroom, and you're telling me that I have to believe him and not his biological science.
Great
So
example.
are we supposed to believe biology, or are we supposed to believe him?
That's the diabolical nature of this.
Right.
And then when you have that discussion, because I swear our brains have gotten smaller in this country, because they can't go they can't go more than 2 steps out. You get labeled and the discussion's over.
Right.
It's infuriating.
Yes,
I mean,
it is.
it's happening. You're going, but there's such a tie-in, as you pointed it out, to cancel culture. This is just one example. COVID. Talk about that. And you say, well, masks don't do anything, and you give them an armload of data. And you point to Sweden, where they never locked down, and they just use common sense.
Sure.
The whole concept of herd immunity and all of these things, right?
Yep.
They don't want to hear it, because remember, our entire survival depends on understanding the world around us on human terms, because God doesn't exist.
Right.
We cannot have that. But what I find very fascinating is how they're digging in, and how this is to me, in a very odd way, this is proof of the Christ ransoming himself for our salvation narrative. It's actually proof to me, because when you watch evil dig in to actually attack our Savior, the way this is going on, and you go, wow, there's more to this. Right. It's obvious to me. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that made sense, but
no, it makes perfect sense, because you take the whole COVID thing, and at the end of the day, my goodness, we've got Johnson & Johnson pulling all of their vaccines now.
Yeah,
for what reason?
Right.
Let's go to the reason real quick. So Johnson & Johnson is saying, 6 people died from blood clots, so that's 6 people in 7 million that have been vaccinated. So according to their statistics, this is an infinitesimally low number of people that have died with regard to the vaccine. And you're gonna tell me that a multi-$100 million investment, they're going to just yank for 6 people? I don't think so. Look at what happened with the vaccine. What was it? The HPV vaccine, which was also a Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay, HPV. There were several people that died, and they kept rolling it out and rolling it out and rolling it out and saying it's not a problem. Okay, a few people died, but it's not our fault. They just had a reaction to it. But they're going to pull it for 6 people for this particular vaccine, the most politicized and politically active virus ever created.
Ever.
Something's not adding up. And a lot of people are saying that the adverse reaction index, which is an actual index that people report adverse reactions to vaccines, are showing tens of thousands of people that have had extremely to this vaccine, and some even on this index have died. You've got people who very publicly came on and said, I got the vaccine, and then 2 days later they're dead. And of course the scientific community believes science, who was going around and saying every person that died of anything ever for the last year, even if they got mangled in a motorcycle accident, died from COVID,
or a bullet in the head, in some
bullet in the head.
Right.
Now, because causation doesn't imply causality, or correlation doesn't imply causality, suddenly we've got a bunch of, or just a handful of people who are saying these people died because after taking the vaccine. Oh, well, it's not really related. It's not because of that. There's no application of science at all. There's no measure. There's no standard. Everything is in a state of flux. And it's all because they have just absolutely rotted their brains with this evolutionary idea. They can't even think their way out of a paper bag because they've bought a scientific premise that is based on circular reasoning, that is completely self-indulging, and can't be disproved unless you step out of it and say, you know what, your paradigm doesn't work even according to your own measure. But they don't want to admit it, and they can't admit it. And because of that, neither can the people who are pushing this vaccine and pushing everything else, the masks and all of it. Their whole way of thinking has been polluted, absolutely polluted by evolutionary science.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And that's the defense. And you just said it best. By their own paradigm, they lost the argument.
Yep.
By their own criteria, they got smoked.
Yeah, but you can't have that conversation. They just cancel you because, well, if you do have the conversation, they will lose, and they know it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. On everything we talked about, COVID, abortion, right? Every one of them. Look at the consistency of this discussion.
Yep.
So, yeah, there you go.
So there you go. Well, it is now 8 o'clock, and I'm going to tell you, I am running on fumes.
We've been busy.
Yeah, this has been a very long week. By the way, for those of you who stuck it out with us for this evening, I put together a speech for a virtual conference called the Ignite the Truth Conference. And if you just do a Google search for Ignite the Truth Conference, you'll see the lineup and you'll see where they're going to be presenting these speeches. But I was asked to give a presentation for this particular conference, and my presentation is on the Battle of Lepanto as it applies today. And I spent my entire week not just video recording, but also doing a ton of video editing, trying to make sure that this whole thing actually looked fairly halfway decent. And last night I was up until almost 2 a.m, putting the final touches on this thing, and I'm beat. I'm real tired. So anyway, we will put in the show notes a link to the conference. But if you just do a Google search, I'll tell you once again, it's Ignite the Truth Conference. So do a Google search, you'll find it. And I encourage you to watch. It's got a really awesome lineup. I think it's going to be a great program. So do look it up. And in the meantime, next week, Jim and I are going to be traveling. So there will not be a program next week. I would try and integrate a program with it, but because our schedule is going to be absolutely filled for those days, for the days at the end of the week, there's just no way that we're going to be able to work it in. So we will see you in 2 weeks. And in that time, if you have a topic that you want us to cover, shoot me an email. Let me know what it is that you'd like for us to talk about. I think that that would be very helpful to, we like to integrate what you guys want to talk about and let us know. So in the meantime, let's go ahead and close with our prayer.
Yeah, thank you guys.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc et in hora mortis nostri. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory,
pray for us.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, everybody. God bless you all. Have a great 2 weeks, and we will see you here. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Thanks, you guys. Love doing this. Bye-bye.
All right.